good evening, everyone who is logging in for the SME Talent Week this evening, hearing us from all over India to join and welcome Rudy Carson, entrepreneur turned investor and advisor. For many of you, he really does not need introduction. I think the contribution that he has done to the human resources space, to the HR technology space, and today to entrepreneurship in large, I think it's fantastic. So thanks, Rudy, for giving us your time and for having us in the show. Very good morning.
Thank you, and good evening to you.
Thank you. Thanks so much. So as all of you know, and just to bring you on board, Rudy founded Kenexa, a human resources software company, in 1997. He took the company IPO in 2005, and Kenexa has received, of course, numerous awards in the HCM and HR technology space. He himself, as a CEO, completed over 20 acquisitions, and the journey of Rudy with Kenexa was ended with the acquisition with IBM in 2012 that actually provided a platform for IBM as a smarter workforce, and that was at a valuation of $1.3 billion. And today, Rudy defines himself as the Grand Poobah at Karlani Capital, which is an investment firm that he started. And I want to start, Rudy, with a question, which is a really small question, and I think our listeners are going to be intrigued about. What is a Grand Poobah?
A Grand Poobah is somebody who thinks they're way more important than they really are, so they're really only a legend in their own mind. But in reality, they're a total idiot.
So why did you call yourself that? Tell me.
Well, because I think the world takes itself a little too seriously. So I don't take myself seriously. Okay. I take my work seriously. And so, Grand Poobah was a Grand Poobah was a cartoon character on Fred Flintstones, a comic strip.
Okay. So it resonated with you when you saw that character?
Yes.
Wonderful. So, Rudy, today what we're going to cover, our listeners are joining us. Sorry, you were going to say something?
I was just going to say, the sense in the business world is everything is really, really serious. And I think we've forgotten to laugh along the way. And so I just wanted to add a little bit of laughter.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thanks for sharing that. So I think the conversation we have today, and that's why I'm so excited to have you, Rudy, with us. Our listeners are mostly entrepreneurs, CEOs who are trying to scale their companies, HR leaders who are supporting those business leaders in their journey of scaling up. And you are, of course, somebody who has been able to scale successfully a company. And as I was saying in your introduction, you've led acquisitions, you took your organization IPO, you had a successful exit, and so many learnings that I think we love to have from you this evening. So the first part of the conversation is really going to be about your journey as a leader and what learnings you gather. We'll probably focus a little bit as well on those truths and those fundamental principles that you've learned, which you think could be relevant for our listeners today. And one of the things that we received from our listeners before this conversation was also about the challenge of building teams and aligning, especially top teams. So we'd love to hear from you on that as well. And then probably closing with some advice that you will have for all of us who are trying to scale our business. So really, these are the 3-4 areas that we have for you this evening.
Sounds good.
Great. So let's get started with the first conversation we love to have with you about your journey as a leader. And you've kind of given us a sneak peek of who you are as a leader and how you think business takes things very serious. And I think we should laugh a bit more when we run our business. But tell us, when you go back, tell us about what has been the journey of self-discovery as a leader yourself. What are the battles that you had to fight? And how different stages of your business required a different kind of leader? And how did you manage to evolve? I know there's a lot of questions in one question, but take us back through your leadership journey and what you learned at every stage.
So let me help contextualize. I think you might know a little bit about this, Esther. For those of you that don't know or haven't seen a picture, I'm really of Indian origin. My great-grandfather left Gujarat in 1906. My parents were born in Tanzania in East Africa. I was born in Kenya. And since then, we've migrated through London, Canada, and arrived at the States. So the roots of the family left India over 100 years ago. I, for the first time, stepped on the Indian soil almost 100 years ago. So my demeanor is that of a Western person, having lived in a bunch of different places. I have been a refugee and an immigrant, not a refugee in the truest sense of the word, but there was a lot of Indians that were expelled out of Africa during the time of the cleansing with the independence wars, and my family was one of those families that kind of moved on. With that context in mind, as a immigrant, one of the gifts that you get is a gift of fear. You are always scared that somebody's going to take something away from you, and you're going to be left penniless on the street. And so while we were growing up, we were broke but never poor. The family was filled with a richness of love, of closeness, but a lot of times we just didn't have enough money to make ends meet. And it is through that journey that two things started developing in me. One was a fear of not having enough, and the other was a greed of wanting too much. And so as an individual, my biggest battle has been always the fear against the greed. And the ego then plays a really important role as the judge between the fear and the greed. Because if the fear and the greed is tied, then the ego speaks out and said, look at me, put your name in lights. And so that personal journey is it's a tough journey because I'm constantly kind of fighting within myself to say, you know, how are you scared and where are you not scared? So let me give you a really simple example. Look, I made a ton of money through this IBM transaction, right? As the founder, CEO, some of it is public knowledge, some of it isn't. Suffice to say, I made more money than most people make in their lifetimes. In spite of all of this, I have a security blanket at my parents' house in Toronto just in case I lose everything. I have a small bank account of $2,000 that I can restart my life because I really think I could lose everything tomorrow. And so that fear has never truly left me. And when you really think about it as a journey as a leader, when you are that scared yourself and when you are that greedy, it's really hard for you to get people to rally around you unless you change your game. And so the lesson I learned was if I stayed in the zone of fear and greed, or if I stayed in the zone of fear, greed, and ego, I would have difficulty. I'm not like Trump. Trump can live off ego. He can live off fear. I'm not that kind of an individual. So what I did was I took a slightly different tack. Every company that I have looked to found or founded in my life, and I founded a bunch, Connexa was one of them, has to have an underlying purpose of some sorts that goes beyond money. And it's around that purpose or the why of the company that really helps drive me and then create the leadership team behind it.
So how did you, because, I mean, it's interesting that you're saying that the fear is actually a gift, because most of us will actually look at fear as something that you want to get rid of. And in your case, you're looking at it as something that actually was an asset when you started. So can you tell us more about how did you convert that fear into something actually positive that drove you to achieve more?
So the way I kind of view it, I've spent my entire life kind of running away from stuff, right? So if I get scared, I want to avoid it. If somebody is starting a confrontation with me, I want to kind of move away from it. If whatever. There's a lot of what people perceive negative stuff that happens. You know? And what I learned is in life and in nature, there are cycles. There are cycles of light and there are cycles of darkness. And you can't, as an individual, do anything to avoid those cycles. So if you picture the night coming and you decide to run west, all you're going to do is prolong the night because the sun's going to continue moving and it's going to get dark. If you really want to shorten the night, you run into the night. You run into the darkness. And if you run into the darkness and you go as fast as you can, you'll come out on the other side faster. And so when you're in a happy zone, run with the flow. When you're in a sad zone, embrace it and run right into it. So if I'm really scared, I embrace the fear and I run right into it. Because at the end of the day, the only thing I can lose is my life. But a life of smallness and a life of fear is not a life I want to lead. So I've come to the conclusion that for me, the best formula is to run into things rather than run away from things. So if you and I started an argument, I would be willing to run into the argument. I wouldn't avoid it. I would embrace the argument. If I'm scared, I embrace the fear. It's a gift that allows me to run faster into the fear, address it head on, and try and wrestle it to the ground, or just let it pass and just keep running into it. I don't know if that makes sense to you, Esther.
Yeah, it makes absolute sense. So I'm looking at it and reflecting about it, and I'm thinking, at what stages, when you look back, 1997, you founded Kenexa, you took it IPO in 2005. Many acquisitions happened in the middle, and different stages, of course, of growth of Kenexa. So how much of it you discover as a leader in different stages, and how much is the journey of Kenexa as a company and the challenges and complexities you had to overcome, how much of it became a self-development journey as well? Can you take us through that timeline back in history?
So I guess the way I look at the companies I founded or that I'm a part of, they're like my family. And it's very hard for me to differentiate between Kenexa and myself, or between Carlani and myself, or Keeper and myself, or MyCareer.com and myself. Whatever these are kind of like not necessarily my children, but they're my children or my uncles or my brothers. Like, where does one end and the other begin? It's really hard for me to say, this is where my personal life ends and this is where my company begins. Yeah. And you might experience the same thing at People Matters, right? Where does People Matters end and Esther begin? So one of the things I learned is I said, if in that journey, if the people that I work with, the employees of the company, instead of saying my employer, said my company, then how much more powerful Kenexa become? So if we say it's our company, and every employee really believes that it's their company, either through financial ownership or through emotional ownership or through psychic ownership, the company would then have a very strong culture of people that cared and helped drive the growth. And so if you talk to people during their time in their journey with Kenexa, there is a high probability that they will say to you, it was my company. They won't say to you, it was my employer. And therein lies the difference. We really strive hard to have people talk about Kenexa as my company rather than my employer. And that's it's a nuance, but if you can execute on that, you can execute extremely well.
Yeah. So tell us more about how did you do it? Because I think obviously a lot of our listeners, whether they're HR leaders or business leaders, they will really, every CEO I speak to will love to make that happen. But you said something very interesting. You think you have to execute it well, you have to architect it well. It will not happen it has to happen by design. So how do you do that?
So one of my mentors in business is somebody on your panel. His name is Vern Harnish. Vern,
okay.
I was a student at Vern's class at MIT, so make sure you tell him I said hello. I just ran into him in Hong Kong a few months ago.
Wow.
And I love Vern dearly. Vern's a really
wonderful,
close, confident, a great mentor, and an amazing teacher. And I was taking his course at MIT at Sloan University in a program called Birthing of Giants. And what Vern gave me were the tools to be able to think about the business at a rational level so that you can turn and scale. And there were a bunch of things he taught me. Everything from Rockefeller habits to the discipline and the rhythm of scaling. And so those of you that are really interested in the mechanics of scaling, I would strongly urge you to either listen to Vern or to read some of the stuff he's written. Because in my opinion, in the 30 to 40 years I've been in the business world, I have as yet to come across a better teacher for me than Vern.
Wonderful. Wonderful. So if you were to choose, because I know we really don't have the time today to go through all those tools that you learned, but if you were to share just one of them that is something that really was very meaningful to you, that you teach, maybe people that you advise or you coach yourself, what will be the one thing that you will take away? And of course, with the context that we will probably have to refer to everything else that he has done, but pick up one thing. We'd love to hear that from your side.
So one of the things I firmly believe is I don't believe you can really change yourself or change anybody. So what you really need to do is you can't improve yourself. You need to compensate for yourself. And a significant weakness of mine is I am like a hummingbird. I go from one flower to the next really fast. And I may even be, if I was born in today's day and age, I might even be mildly autistic or have ADHD. But in the early days as an immigrant, you really didn't worry about stuff like that. So I have a tremendous amount of difficulty staying focused on something. What I learned is if I can develop processes and tools to overcome some of the areas in which I believed were affecting the scaling of my company, then that's the way I could compensate for my behavior. So I did two things.
Correct.
I surrounded myself with people that I trusted who were better than me in various areas, and they allowed me the ability to be free-ranging in my thinking while developing discipline and focus in the business. And then for myself, when I realized that I don't have the discipline and I don't have the focus, I developed tools. So, for example, I would have every Monday huddles with the management team or stand-up meetings. And Esther, I never miss those meetings. I mean, I could be in India on a business trip, and it was 8:30 in the morning, and it would be so it would be, let's say I had it at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and it was 3 a.m. or 6 a.m. in India, whatever the time was. It didn't matter where in the world I was. I had to be on that call.
Yeah.
And so because I had that discipline, because I had started a process of demanding attendance at that particular call, I myself had to be there.
Yeah.
And so that created a universal theme of discipline and focus. So I'm using that as an example to say that if you're scaling a company, you may be, and you probably have more assets than I do, you probably have fewer weaknesses than I do, but lead with your weakness and figure out a way to compensate for it, because your strengths will come naturally. So If I am going to go on a sales pitch in India, and I am rolling out a software product that there are no customers with, and I have no references, I am not going to hide that weakness, hoping that the customer ignores it. I lead with it. I'll say, look, Mr. Customer, today is your lucky day. You're talking to one of the largest providers of this software. And guess what? We don't have a customer in India. So the first customer we get will get to join us on stage and present at every single forum, and look what it's going to do for your resume. Can you please be our first customer? Because now, when you are a buyer of the product, you rarely get to effectively change your own resume. But if you're the first buyer of the product, your resume now improves because your peers will come and talk to you to find out if the product works or doesn't work.
Correct.
So now I turn what is an obvious weakness for my product into a strength at the selling process. So the person I'm speaking to gets a gift. There are no Indian references. How exciting is that? Because if you make a decision to buy, you'll become the reference. How cool is that? And you get to be on stage and you get to talk about it, and a whole bunch of people are going to call you because, look, we're going to be successful in India, with or without you. Do you want to join the journey?
Yeah. Correct. So that's...
And you feed this line to 100 people, 10 people will buy it, you know? And then you better make sure you execute and deliver. Better make sure you execute and deliver.
Which I think once you have put that level of promise, then make sure that you actually do it.
Oh, yeah. And so one of the things, here's another example of scaling, right? In the early days when the company was really small, and I'd be walking up to customers, right? What I realized was everyone else, so the world is broken up between midgets and regular-sized people and giants.
Okay.
And when you're a small company, you're a little midget, which means everyone's kicking you around. Right? So the midgets tend to fight with one another, and they walk up to the customer and they say, we are the greatest thing ever, and we make all these promises. And meanwhile, they have no customers, or they have only 2 customers. And they think the customers are fools. The customers are going to believe them. So I learned very early in my career, hey, Mr. Customer, I'm a really small company. I only have one other customer. And the only thing I can promise you is I will make mistakes. And because I'm new in the business, I don't know a lot of what I'm doing. But I can promise you one thing, that I am the best person on the planet to recover from a mistake. So the only guarantee I will give you is that I will make a mistake.
Yeah.
And with that guarantee, I will promise you the ability to fix it the fastest way possible. Well, now I'm leading with my strength because the guy is already thinking, hey, this guy's a startup. He's got 2 customers. He's an idiot. He's a fool. He doesn't really know what he's doing, but oh my God, at least he's willing to admit he's going to make mistakes. Yeah. Let me trust him.
Yeah.
So that's what I mean when I say fly into the face of logic.
Yeah. So is that, and I wanted to ask you some more about these fundamental truths that you have learned. And I think one of them is definitely about don't hide your weakness and probably use those weaknesses as an opportunity to create a strength out of it. Any other reflection when you look back, any other fundamental truths in your journey as an entrepreneur as you were scaling your business that you love to share with us? Because I think each one of them is a gift that you're giving us this evening, because each one of them is probably something we can go back and find reflection and find learning.
So, when somebody tells their story or their journey, the truth becomes their truth, right? It's not necessarily your truth. And so when we're learning, we're going out and saying, can we find everybody else's truths so we can find our own truth in everybody else's truth? And so the fundamental truth that I have learned is there are no fundamental truths. There are only truths for you. Right? So there are no fundamental lessons for me. There are fundamental lessons. There are fundamental lessons for me, but my fundamental lessons are not your fundamental lessons. So if I was going to give you kind of 2 or 3 to begin your journey on, I would start with, if you are in your business, don't pretend your business isn't you. Don't pretend.
Can you elaborate?
Well, there is this thing called work-life balance, which is a pile of crap as far as I'm concerned. There is no such thing as work-life balance, dude. It's all the same thing. Your work is your life, and your life is your work, and your family is your work, and your work is your family. And if you can learn how to blend everything together into one big, there's this Indian dish called khichdi or halim or whatever. There's all these names to it, where you toss all these vegetables and you stir it and you let it simmer, and it tastes really good, but it's got everything in it. That's your life. So don't try and build artificial walls when they naturally don't exist. Don't try and put yourself into a place where it feels unnatural for you. When you hear people talk about work-life balance, don't figure that that's the way you should think. Stay within yourself, and the fundamental truth is it all mixes together. And the energy you spend trying to differentiate it, avoid it and spend the energy and time mixing it more. So it doesn't, so there is no difference. Now that's kind of the one thing that I've learned, where I see a lot of people fighting a battle around artificial walls that may or may not exist. The second thing that I've learned is, while a business is meeting its core purpose, whatever it might be, like one of the more recent businesses that I spent a lot of time in is called Keeper, which is a software company. It was a startup done by 2 founders, but I spent a lot of time with them. It's really about saving people time. It's lifetimes of time saved when you're traveling and in a hotel. And that's kind of the way I think about it, right? That's the core purpose of the business. But never, ever, 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 ever forget about the cash. Because every time I've forgotten about the cash, I've got my ass kicked. So I've approached bankruptcy or been technically bankrupt 3 times in my life. And it's not a happy place to be, trust me. You figure, there's a definition of stupidity, as Einstein said, which is doing the same thing over again and hoping for different results. Most people talk about being bankrupt once and then they learned their lesson. It never happened again. Well, with me, I'm very dumb on the dumb scale. I got there 3 times. And I navigated my way past it. But there were 3 very crucial times in the career of the company where we were technically insolvent, and I was personally technically insolvent, and I had to navigate my way through it, and it's not a fun place.
Yeah, absolutely.
So never, ever forget about your cash. Most of us aren't fortunate like Bill Gates, who always had 1 year's worth of cash in the bank. But I heard him say that, and I go, man, how lucky can you be? I've never been in that place.
Yeah. Wonderful. Thanks, Rudy, for sharing that. So when I'm reflecting about what you were talking about, building teams, and I'm taking you back again about, you spoke about the fact that it's people who joined your journey don't look at your organization as an employer, but really as their own. So I want to kind of ask you a few questions about fundamental mistakes that you think you could have avoided when it comes to building teams. So we know the things that worked, and you spoke about, culture and how you create and architect that rhythm and create the mechanics of scale. But any confessions that you would want to share with us in terms of what not to do if you're really trying to build a team that is going to align and help you take the business forward? What are the not to do's that you will give us?
So, what are the not to do's? So let me start with a very basic thing. A lot of people have. Do you have a to-do list, Esther? Do you have a list of things to do?
I do. Yeah,
and how many of those to-do lists do you have? How many to-do lists do you have?
I'm crazy about to-do lists.
Do you know I don't? I only have one. Yeah. You know what? What if I told you I have only one list, and it's a don't-do list?
Yeah.
That's it.
I know
the only list
I know
I
that.
have.
And you know what?
I don't. Because you know what happens is anything that's really important to get done, my mind won't forget it. And if it's important to somebody else, they'll chase me down. So one of the things I learned is a fundamental mistake I made while building teams was I thought I was more important in their life than they were themselves. That's full of crap when you think that, right? It's like I got to be really concerned about their engagement. That's just false. I mean, I'm just creating a sense of hierarchy where none exists. Yeah. We're kind of equal, So I would make a mistake like I would kind of cater to them rather than work with them. And so fundamentally, I think it all boils down to the fundamental mistake I kept making over and over again is the fundamental mistake of my ego, which is I'm more important than I really am. And the minute I can get past that and have a conversation as two human beings should, it's like all my problems seem to vanish.
Mm.
And so while you're scaling and building the team, I would categorize, and look, if you and I were having this conversation in public where others were hearing, there's no way I'd admit to you that my ego is my biggest weakness, right? Because it's a private conversation between you and me. I don't mind admitting it.
Yeah, that's right. So what will go in your not to do list? Just take us through it, because I've heard you saying that before, and I know how powerful that is. So give us an example of what will go in your not to do list, and you will not have a to do list, actually.
I actually do not have a to do list, and I know people find that really hard to believe, but I let my calendar drive my activities, and anything that is important enough naturally occurs to me. So when I wake up in the morning, I naturally know what's the most important things I got to get accomplished today, which then allows me to focus on the longer term because I don't get cluttered up with busy stuff to do that is mostly unimportant. So on my not-to-do list, as an example, which is probably more appropriate for people who are generally working in larger companies, is that in larger companies, people come to vent to you. They go, did you see that boss? He did this, and this, and what a mean guy he is. And so in my not-to-do list is do not allow people to vent to me. So the minute somebody starts, do you see what happened and starts on that part, which is the Hindi word panchat, starts in the panchat direction, I go, stop, I'm done. And so what I did in the early stages is I would never allow anyone to complain to me about somebody else. So let's say if Esther and John worked with one another, and Esther came and said, John is a liar because he told me he was going to do this, and this, and I see John walking in front of my office while Esther's telling me this. And I go, stop, Esther. John, can you come in here for a moment? Esther, could you tell John what you just told me? And you go, well, John, the last time you and I spoke, you were talking about doing this, but you never quite followed through. And I turn around and go, Esther, that's not what you said. You said John is a liar. Now you're lying in front of John. Is John a liar or are you a liar? All of a sudden, that panchat stops right away because you start shining a light on it.
Yeah.
So I don't let anyone vent at me.
Right.
I don't let anyone complain about anyone else to me without having first complained to the other person. You know, those are the kinds of things I don't allow that to happen.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, and the list goes on. The list goes on. I mean, I will not allow, for example, when you become, when you sell a company and you end up being in the papers and everyone kind of knows you're quote-unquote rich, you get a lot of requests. So today, I do not sit on boards or not-for-profit boards. It's on my don't-do list. I don't care who it is. It could be the most powerful not-for-profit board in the world. It could be the United Nations calling me and saying, sit on our board. It's a not-for-profit board? Nope, I don't sit on it. Sorry. It could be the Franklin Institute here, which is the largest one here in Philly with the best reputation. It could be the Met in New York. Nope, sorry, I don't sit on not-for-profit boards. It's part of my don't-do list. I don't sit on not-for-profit board of directors. Period. End of story. So it makes the conversation very easy because everyone turns around and invites you to all these places. And I go, look, I know why you're inviting me. You're hoping I will either give you money or sit on your board. Well, I'm telling you right now, I'll come to your event because you're offering me free food and a wonderful evening of entertainment. But if you're expecting me to contribute to your board or sit on your board, the answer I'm telling you right now is no. Are you sure you want me there?
Yeah.
Use your resources with somebody else. So I'm very direct that way because on my don't-do list is I will not sit on boards.
Best advice you've got, and what did that mean to you?
So I would say, I think earlier in the conversation we had, I mentioned that one of my mentors was Vern Harnish, who's part of this panel. And in Vern's opinion, he's taught me a lot over the years, but probably I would say one of the key pieces of knowledge that I've gained, I would break it up into two components. One is a meeting I had with Harold Geneen, who used to be the CEO of ITT Hartford, which was one of the original conglomerates from back in the 80s and 90s. And Harold was a fairly old chap, and I made the pilgrimage to Connecticut to meet with him, and he spent a couple of hours with me. But the one thing that came out of the conversation is he said, the job of a business leader is to get to the unshakable, true facts about the business. And that has always stayed with me for a long period of time because at the end of the day, the information coming to you from your customers, from your employees, from your products can be really fuzzy. In the human activity, interaction, and emotions can create lenses whereby the data gets corrupted. And we're seeing it today in today's day and age, fake news and alternative facts and all those things. But at the end of the day, the job of the business leader is to get to that unshakable fact about their business. And if you can get to that, if you can get to the core purpose, you can get to the core issue, you can get to the core customer concern and build on that, that was probably the strongest piece of advice I got from him. And from Vern, I would say, he and I once had a discussion around this notion of ladder of inference, which was written by Senge at MIT, and you can look it up. Senge has written a book called The Fifth Dimension. I'd ignored the textbook, but just look at the ladder of inference, where he talks about the view of the world is colored by your frame of reference, and that lens is colored by opinions and judgment, while the data gets distorted. And your job in life is to break that lens all the time as you view the facts. And I will add kind of one more piece. Alan Kay, who was the founder of Unix, once said to me, a different point of view is worth 40 IQ points. And so if I take all these three things together, it's the core issue, which is data drives scale. Unshakable data guarantees growth.
So that takes us back to that point of also having the discipline and the perseverance and the authenticity to look at that data without trying to fool yourself to start seeing what you wanted to see and to really take that ownership.
There is something that is very uncomfortable to a human being, to look at raw data without making a judgment call, right? It's really difficult for us to, when's the last time you stared at your naked body in front of a mirror for 5 minutes? You get uncomfortable doing that. There is a level of discomfort at looking at the core. I don't understand what that is. I am not a psychologist, a sociologist, but what I do know is the deeper I drive to the root of the issue, the more likely the decision that is made will be the correct one. Because the data will drive the decision.
Correct. Wonderful. So is your advice to this community any different? So if you were to wear now another hat, which means you looked at these individuals that you mentioned and how they helped you understand something that was really, really important for you, and now you're actually addressing them and saying, okay, if I have to give you my piece of advice, what would that be?
I think I would change it. That's the advice I got, because I think advice is something that you take with a grain of salt or a spoonful of sugar. It can be bitter or it can be far too bland. But if I was giving advice to people who are listening on the call today, by their very definition, these individuals are successful. They're successful enough to be on the call. They're successful enough to be in a position in their organization where they can find the time to be on the call, or they're out there as aspiring entrepreneurs. If I look at my life, it has been filled with joy and happiness, because along the way I made sure that I enjoyed the journey. I relished the experiences, and I laughed a lot. And so if I put those pieces together, while you're driving and scaling your business, that's fantastic. But make sure that you have happiness and joy and inspiration from that journey, because you kind of only come around once, at least in an aware form. You may come around a second time and you may not be aware that you were around the first time. But really relish the journey. It's the ability to be grateful for a couple of things every night when you go to bed. It's the ability to laugh at yourself, and it's the ability to be able to just enjoy what nature has to give to us. So let's not lose sight of that.
Wonderful. Wonderful, Rudy. So I think we have relished and really enjoyed our conversation. I think not only...
You're good.
It's really, we're not only taking away your learning, but I think it's the inspiration. I mean, not only myself, but everybody who's on this call listening to you. And many of us have heard you before as well. And it's always a great inspiration and a great opportunity to learn from you.
You are so kind. And I really appreciate the fact that you haven't forgotten me. You know, there is an old saying, right? You're only as good as the last headline, and my headlines were a while ago, and you still remember me, so thank you very much. I'm deeply honored.
You're welcome. You're welcome, Rudy.